Hello my lovely friends, it's Yulia here from East Cotton Burgess Tea. I often get asked this by clients, what is the best way to store my tea properly to ensure its flavor and nutritional qualities are preserved for the longest time possible, especially if it's a particularly expensive or rare tea? Today I'll answer this question for you guys based on the information I've read when I first became really interested in tea many years ago, and based on my own experience of owning a tea company where I do have to store lots and lots of tea. In this video, you'll learn why tea deteriorates over time, why tea storage is so important in preventing this from happening, and what are some of the best tea storage practices we can follow to ensure that our tea is preserved for the longest time possible after we bring it into our home. Now, I have written a more comprehensive article on this on the East Cotton Burgess website because there's more information in there than I can delve into in here, so I'll leave a link to that article for you guys down below this video. Let's dive straight into it, shall we? Tea storage largely revolves around the concept of oxidation. Let me explain this one. Tea can be stored for two main purposes. The first one being to age the tea, where the tea is allowed to oxidize under controlled conditions. And the second is to preserve the tea, so to prevent the oxidation from happening. In this video, I'll focus on tea storage concept number 2, where the tea is stored with the aim of preventing oxidation from happening. So why is tea storage so important? From my video on oxidation, we've learned that oxidation of the tea leaves happens for three main reasons, which is exposure to light, exposure to oxygen, and the oxidation enzyme such as PPO. Unless a tea has been allowed to oxidize completely during production, every tea has the potential to continue oxidizing at a slower rate after it has been produced. This is generally undesirable, and thus we need to slow down this oxidation and tea deterioration with proper tea storage. So, how do we ensure best tea storage? Since oxidation happens in the presence of oxygen, the first thing we can do to reduce oxidation is to minimize its contact with oxygen. The easiest way to do this is to store your tea in an airtight container. This might sound easy, but the problem is that lots of tea vendors seem to be selling their tea in temporary storage packets which aren't airtight. If this is the case with the tea that you bought, transfer it to an airtight tea storage tin as soon as possible to preserve the tea. So if you're looking for such tea storage tins, we have started selling them at East Cotton Burgess last week actually. Another advantage of these Cotton Burgess tea tins is that they are quite slim. This means that the amount of leaf exposed to oxygen at the top of the tin is minimized. The moral of the story is, do choose any tin that you like, but make sure that the tin minimizes the amount of tea leaves exposed to air. This basically means that the slimmer the tin and the smaller the opening at the top of the tin, the better. Additionally, it's important to minimize opening and closing of your tin container. This is why these Cotton Burgess tins are also quite small, to minimize the amount of tea that is constantly exposed to air whilst you're drinking a batch of tea. The takeaway point of this is to store your tea divided into small batches. Another tip is to minimize the amount of air spaces between the leaves by packing your tea as tightly as possible. So fill up your storage container, shake it to make sure that the leaves pack as tightly as possible, and then fill some more. The more tea there is in a space, the fewer oxidants there are likely to be, such as air. The second rule of tea storage is to keep it away from light. As we've seen from the tea oxidation formula in my previous video on oxidation, tea oxidizes in the presence of light, thus this factor needs to be removed to minimize oxidation. Once again, this can be achieved by storing your tea in an opaque tin container and minimizing the opening and closing of your tin. This means no clear plastic or glass containers, as pretty as they might look. This also means that paper packets might not be the best way to store your tea because they will allow some light in. The third rule of tea storage is that tea must be kept away from moisture. This is because tea is hygroscopic, which means that it absorbs moisture from the air. The best way to protect your tea from moisture in the air is to store it in an airtight storage container to minimize the opening and closing of your tin. And if you're storing your tea in packets, to squeeze out all the air from the packets. The fourth rule of tea storage is that it must be kept away from strong odors. This is because tea leaves have a property of absorbing scents from their surroundings. This might be a useful property to have when creating scented teas, such as jasmine scented tea, for example, when the tea leaves are laid out amongst jasmine flowers, then they absorb the scents, creating scented tea. But this property of the tea leaves can be detrimental when the tea leaves absorb unpleasant odors from the air. The takeaway point is that tea must be kept away in a place away from strong odors. This includes places like your kitchen or your fridge or a musty smelling basement, for example. This also means not storing your tea in containers made from materials that are good at absorbing scents, such as wood, plastic, or containers with strong smelling rubber seals. And the fifth rule of tea storage is that tea must be kept away from heat. This is because ambient heat speeds up oxidation, so to reduce this from happening, we need to keep our tea in a cool place. This might even mean that some particularly delicate green or yellow teas might benefit from being stored in the fridge or the freezer. But if this is to be done, it must be done properly to avoid condensation on the leaves. Firstly, it is advisable to package your tins into small packets. Secondly, make sure to squeeze out as much of the air as possible from your packets, because this air is likely to condense once it goes into your fridge or the freezer. Thirdly, when you do take out your packets from the cold storage, don't open them until the tea leaves have reached room temperature. This is also to prevent condensation. Okay, I know this was a lot of information to take in on tea storage, but that's it for today. If you would like to know more about tea storage, do check out the Scott and Burgess article in the link below this video. If you like this video and would like to see more videos like this, hit the like button below, hit the bell button, share this video with your friends, and be sure to subscribe. Delicious with Yulia is signing off, and I'll see you again next week, guys. Ciao!